Thank you for coming. Welcome to today's xTalk. Today's talk is on leveraging the new MITx-CANVAS integration. So we will have Tyler Smith, who is the instructor for Pedagogy Training and Biology. That being said, Tyler, I will hand off to you to get us started.
Cool, thank you. And thank you for having me again to talk about this. I'm excited to talk about some of, let me move my Zoom bars, some of what we've been utilizing this integration for in some of our undergraduate biology courses. So I work in, there's kind of two halves to my role. One is I provide structured training for our graduate students that are teaching in the department. And then I also work with a few of the undergraduate courses in the department to help manage the courses and integrate curriculum into them. And so today I'm going to talk about two courses that we've been utilizing this integration in. One is 7012, which is our GIR undergraduate intro bio course. So this is one of 4 flavors of 701, but it's also our largest one. So it's about over 300 students per semester, 3 lectures a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 1-hour lectures. And so we have about 3 hours of new lecture content per week. And I'll also add that because it's a GIR and it's an intro level class, the vast majority of our students in this class are not biologists or biology adjacent. And so we have a very diverse in terms of educational interest in this class, as well as we have a very wide range from first-year students to fourth-year students, fairly evenly distributed. The second class that we've been utilizing this integration with is a upper division core class, so 705, which is undergraduate biochemistry. This is also a smaller class, but still about 140 students per semester. It also follows 3 lectures a week, although 1.5 hours, so 4.5 hours of new lecture content a week. So both of these classes have quite a lot of new content per week. And so we've been trying to utilize these integrations to kind of pick what are the core concepts that we want to help emphasize in our students. And the other thing I'll add is 705, in contrast to 701, being in a upper year course, it's predominantly sophomores or second and third years. And most of them are biology adjacent majors. So we have like a lot of pre-med students in 705. And so it's certainly more advanced curriculum as well. I'm going to start though with talking about our efforts in 7012, and I'll also add that both of these courses are in large we're utilizing the MITx courses that were made by our MITx bio team here, who some of the people that have helped make these courses are on the call with Mary Ellen and Darcy, and Chris has started as well. And also this is in collaboration with Dr. E.B. Max Harry, who is a new instructor this semester. Her and I have been working together on 7012 this semester. And so one of the key things with this approach is really identifying what is it that we want to share with the students, because we have, essentially an entire digital course, right? We have all of the MIT, the 700X and the 705X resources. And one iteration of this is we could just share the entire course with the class and basically duplicate the efforts that are happening in the kind of live residential course. I think we've taken the approach of really selecting key components to help reinforce and emphasize parts of the lecture, rather than just giving them the entire lecture a second time. So this is one kind of lecture series of sequentials from our 700X course. And we have a lot of different units and sequentials in this. And so what we've been doing is identifying, what's one thing that's kind of a key component from this lecture, because they'll essentially have all of this lecture content, on Monday when Professor Lander or Corradine lectures on this material. So it's not necessarily useful for them to go through all of this material a second time. We also provide them lecture recordings from the semester that they can look at if they want to see what did the professor say at minute 10, right? So instead, we've been picking out kind of key components to pick out and isolate to share with the students. And so one integration of this has been these kind of ungraded, what we call like deep dives, which kind of explore in a little more depth key concepts from lecture. And this, we kind of pair it directly to that day's lecture. Not every lecture has this. I think we've had approximately like one per week of what's a concept that like students really struggle with. So in this example, it was kind of tying the concepts of meiosis and cell division, and how that relates to genetic heritability and, when we utilize Punnett squares. And so this is a concept that students traditionally really struggle with. And so in that lectures module, we link them to this kind of deep dive that then when they click on it, it sends them directly to a Canvas page with this embedded video. So that's one kind of implementation we've been using in 701. The second is we've also been utilizing them as graded assignments. So instead of having, a separate problem set, we utilize our MITx problem sets that we then tailor to the residential course. So we make edits depending on that year's lecture content, and to kind of tailor it, sometimes we shorten or we lengthen certain assignments. And these are all similarly embedded directly then into the Canvas page. So I think one of the big benefits of this, both for the students and on the instructor side, is that there isn't one, they're auto-graded, which is very nice. But two, there's no second site for students. So students don't have to go to Canvas and then also enroll in an MITx course. Canvas really serves more as now a kind of one-stop shop, especially since we also utilize Gradescope, and Canvas also has a Gradescope integration, right? So prior to these integrations, you would have your Canvas site, and then the students would have to go to Gradescope, and the students would have to go MITx. Now we're able to kind of utilize Canvas as kind of a one-stop shop for the students. And with this integration, we also don't have to manage MITx enrollments. And I think especially with a class this size, you have 330 students. It doesn't take a very large percentage of students to mess up enrolling in every site for it to cause kind of a headache of emails and going back and forth and kind of hurting students to make sure everyone's on the same page. So this, as long as they can find it on the Canvas site, we don't have to, worry about managing MITx enrollments as well. And it's like much more streamlined for the students. One thing I will note, actually, that's come up a couple times that's probably worth saying is that because of the prevalence of MITx, enough students coming into our class have used the MITx course that they're actually confused why there's not an external site. And every semester, I usually get at least one email asking me for where they go to the MITx dashboard because they used it to, study for the ASE or something. And they ask why the site doesn't show up there. And we have to explain that it's now like an integrated Canvas feature. Like they don't have to enroll in the MITx course, which I think is probably a testament to how, heavily utilized the MITx courses are. So something to be cognizant of. You will have students that actually are confused by this integration. The other thing that's really nice about this integration is that it has auto-normalized scoring. So what I mean by that is like we can set the Canvas grade to be out of 3 points total in the grade book. And however many points the MITx assignment is worth, it'll normalize it to that 3 points in the grade book. So if we have 10 questions that are each worth 1 point, it'll normalize those scores when it sends it to the Canvas gradebook to be out of 3 points, if that's what we want it in the Canvas gradebook. I think this is worth mentioning because this is actually something that Gradescope does not do, and can be pretty frustrating when trying to figure out how to balance, points and things in the gradebook. And as well, they kind of send directly from MITx to the Canvas gradebook. We don't have to manually push syncing of grades or anything either. And so the last integration I'll touch on is actually one I've talked about before a few months ago, because it was born out of a Canvas Innovation Fund project in undergraduate biochemistry, kind of the third implementation we've utilized. Because we have 4.5 hours of new lecture content per week. We've utilized it in collaboration with Catherine Duan, who was a student for the class and then also served as a recitation leader for 2 years and spent 2 summers working on these CIF projects. We developed a pre-work module, or now multiple. We're now directly embedded in Canvas, kind of a hybrid between giving them lecture videos and practice problems. We select like 3 or 4 videos of a kind of challenging topic that we have about 4 separate videos that are spliced up into about 5-minute clips, followed by short test yourself questions. And we asked the students to do this before they came to lecture. Our pilot run of this was last spring, and we did it with a single lecture. We had very good success. I've talked about this in a past xTalk, but our completion rate of this assignment was like 98%, which is actually kind of mind-blowing. And the exam question on this topic, which traditionally students struggle on, went up 10 to 15 points that semester. And so one thing Catherine spent last summer doing is building more of these pre-work assessments that we're then going to deploy this coming spring, where we're shooting to have about 1 pre-work assignment per, a little less than 1 per week for students. And we're going to see, do we continue to see kind of improvement in student understanding. I think especially with a class like this, because we have these really nice MITx resources, it allows us to make these kind of very targeted, like, again, we didn't share this entire lecture with the students. We chose about 15 to 20 minutes of concepts that we thought really the students should reinforce and that it would be helpful for them to see before they come to class. And we targeted it, kind of spliced them out of the whole lecture and targeted it around that. And this was as well integrated into their problem set grade that week. And so I'll kind of close with, that's kind of the 3 flavors of this MITx integration that we've utilized. I think some lessons that we've learned and been thinking of is, one, thinking about, we've been approaching it for like, how do we identify the concepts and content that best complements and reinforces the residential lectures, right? And I think like student time is pretty finite. And so instead of giving them just, a second lecture to watch through, which very few of them are actually going to do, can we strategically select items that kind of enhance rather than duplicate the lectures? Another thing that we kind of discovered pretty early on with this integration is it's pretty like, usually there's not issues rendering, but you definitely want to test this. One thing we discovered very early on is if you have a sequence or if you have a unit with like a lot of tabs or a lot of kind of verticals in it, it'll actually cut off on the windows. So this was a lecture that we provided as a reference at one point. And we noticed that actually you can't navigate to the tabs that are on the edges. And so we can circumvent that by, we splice everything up into smaller bits anyway. So this usually doesn't end up being a problem, but certainly something to think about, as well as testing all the links. So one thing we noticed that's good to be wary of is because the students are not actually enrolled in the MITx course, if you have a link that sends them to another page on the MITx course, it won't work. Because basically they don't have permission to visit that page since they're not enrolled in the course. So one thing we typically do is we just kind of reformat that as a PDF or a page that we put on Canvas, and we relink it in the MITx assignment to a Canvas page is kind of how we've been working around that. It does seem to handle file downloads well, actually. So if you link via like HTML code a file for it to download from like the content library on MITx, it does seem to do that. It mostly does not allow them just to visit a separate page. And so I'll close with just kind of what we're thinking about going forward is, one, continuing to kind of evaluate, revise and refine student engagement in 7012. So this was our first semester trying this out. So I think we're going to kind of keep thinking about, are there more things we should be providing deep dives on? Or should we kind of, one thing we can do now is look at exam scores and say, oh, they really struggled with this thing, we should provide them with an additional resource on that next fall. And as well, I think one thing we also maybe want to think about more is like actually driving traffic to these. Um, how do you actually advertise these and get students to visit it? Because if you just throw it up as a link on Canvas, they're proud. A few students will come across it, but most will not engage with it. And then in the spring, we're going to test our kind of expanded suite of 705 pre-work modules. I'm personally very excited for this. Catherine put in a lot of work into these over the summer. And I think we had very promising results last spring and very positive student reception of this as well. Actually, I received multiple emails from students asking for more of these, which is the first time I've ever had students ask me for more graded work. So we're very excited to kind of test it now with this in the spring. So with that, I'll end.
The benefits to students as this being sort of making it like a one-stop place for them to get the content that they need rather than having to go to multiple sites, I think is a really important one, especially with grades being part of the integration and feeding into Canvas. I think those are two really key features that folks may find interesting and want to be interested in trying this out if they have MITx content and are using it for their residential courses. I guess, one thing I would say is that it's a helpful feature. It's potentially time saving for the instructors. It's a little more simple for the students. As with any new tool or thing that comes out, right, there's still a need to somehow organize things in a way that makes sense. And Tyler, I'd be really interested in hearing more along like how do you figure out, like, what are some of the ways folks might think about to determine what are the things you have to emphasize? You mentioned like looking at where there's difficulties on an exam or problem set, for example. But are there other key points that are helpful to know? Like, how do you actually figure that out? I'm curious.
I think, well, one thing I have kind of a unique position. I think like instructors, we work very closely with our TAs and our graduate students that are teaching. So some of this, having done this a few years, is like I've just heard, every year TAs struggle to talk about restriction enzyme cloning, right? Or they struggle to talk about meiosis, or like struggle to get the students to kind of really deeply understand the topics. And I think they tend to be topics that are very kind of conceptually complex, or like require a lot of problem solving, or like complex biological processes where a lot of things are moving around. So it's like things are very difficult to get in just like one sitting in lecture, right? And so I think things that like that really benefit from kind of repeated exposure. Um, there's that famous like the curve of forgetting that's used in psychology about like every time you are exposed to something, your ability to remember it, the baseline goes up and up. The other thing I really didn't talk about is we also have in the MITx course a few deep dive videos that actually are not really they're basically filmed of like what biology looks like in a lab setting, where a graduate student did like a short 5-minute video of like, here's how we culture yeast in the lab, and here's how we do replica plating experiments. And I think that's something that's often very much missing from lecture-based classes, is like the lab application. And so there's a few lectures where we also pick things like that, where it's like, can we give the students a bit more context as to like this technique we're talking about? What does it actually look like in the lab, right? In a way that's very hard to capture in a 300-person lecture hall, right? And so that's kind of the second thing we think about. So one is like, what traditionally have been the concepts that students most struggle with, and can we identify the source of that, right? Because again, we don't want to just repeat a whole lecture, right? But is it that, oh, people just really struggle with working out the kind of spatial logistics of how restriction enzymes work, right? And so like that's a concrete concept that then trickles down to the rest of that lecture topic. And then other things that are like, just seeing how this actually works in real life, in a lab, like does that build on to the context, and like giving the student a way to kind of conceptualize and visualize what we're talking about. That's not just like a schematic of a DNA gel, or like a schematic of a circle with like, yeast colonies on it. But can we actually just show them, here's what a graduate student is doing in their lab? Yeah. It was kind of a bit the evaluation was a bit post hoc of, it was kind of, we had this opportunity of, a professor actually, somewhat close to the start of the semester came up with this idea. And so we kind of put the pilot experiment we put together fairly quickly. And so then we just kind of thought like afterwards, I actually didn't think about it afterwards of, we should look at the exam score for this topic to see. And so it was just that, it was kind of a pilot that had some promising results. I think one thing I'll say as well, like I had 2 or 3 students email me directly afterwards asking if we could do more of them for the rest of the semester, because they like found it much more effective. Like they found it much easier to pay attention in lecture because they had been pre-exposed to the content. And these were graded. So like, I've never had a student ask me for more graded work, but I think that's a very fast-paced class. So there is this student desire for, can we provide them with more kind of focused reinforcement of concepts. And because it's an upper division class, most of them to some capacity are interested in the topic, which is kind of a unique in comparison to 701, where most people are not biologists. But yeah, that was kind of how that experiment came to be, and it looked like it worked well. So we decided to build more for this upcoming semester.
Yeah.
So I think we targeted a lecture that was on acids and bases, which is a very chemistry heavy lecture as well. So we have students that come in with a lot of varying backgrounds in chemistry. So it tends to be a topic that a lot of people struggle with. That plus I think the structure of the course is very fast paced. So it's 1.5 hour lectures 3 times a week. And that's probably another discussion on the research that's been done in student attention spans and how long they can actually sit. But what I will say in like both of the student emails I've received is they all said they found it easier to pay attention in lecture because they had had a chance to digest some of the content beforehand. Because I think what's happened, my instinct is what's happening is they're there locked in for like the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes. They're processing this stuff they're seeing for the first time, and then they're kind of lost for the rest of the lecture, right? It's very hard to maintain focus for that long, especially if it's things you've never seen before. So I think we picked things that were like, what are some of the core concepts that translate to the rest of the lecture? So typically things that are in the beginning of the lecture, so that when they come in, they kind of have a head start on that first like 20 minutes, right? And really that first 20 minutes is then reinforcing that content to make the rest of the lecture go more smoothly. That's my instinct as to what's happening. And like I said, like multiple students, it's multiple students out of a class of 140, but like I've never had students reach out in that way before at all. So I think one thing we're thinking about, at least I'm thinking about this spring, is can we run some surveys on this to gauge? I think there's a question of like, will this hold up if we do it, once a week? Or is there some level of fatigue as the semester grinds on? Because this was in the first week of the semester we did this experiment. So, is there some fatigue as the semester grinds on and their schedules get busier? Or does it continue to kind of have a positive effect on lecture understanding? So it's certainly not a controlled experiment looking at the exam scores. There's lots of things that factor in, but I was surprised that it seemed like that was not the thing they struggled with the most on that exam. And traditionally it has been.